realities. So they then instantly approached us to look at recreating Stonehenge to the highest level of quality we could on the computers they had access to. In the early stages, the ultimate objective was to design a model that would help school kids become experienced with Stonehenge from a historical perspective. And also the idea was to give it to academics so that they could look into various aspects of interpretation, recreate the stones, look at what it was like to move, let's say, the blue stones from the River Avon up the avenue onto the site itself.
Virtual Stonehenge is in fact two different projects which illustrate the problems of bringing computers to bear on history, the conflict between extending access and producing a site of archaeological worth. On the one hand is the World Wide Web site, where the casual visitor can fly around, watch a virtual sunrise and observe the various stages of Stonehenge's construction. On the other is what the developers call the Big VR model, composed of all the available satellite imagery, stereo photographs and data derived from hundreds of archaeological digs, not only of the stones, but the surrounding landscape.
The photographs themselves of the stones had to be processed so that we could texture them onto the surface. So there you're looking at maybe a megabyte of data per stone. So it's actually quite demanding. And we have to apply techniques to handle all this. We can't display all the texture, all the geometry all the time. So when the viewer is quite a distance away from the stones, we switch some of them off, or we draw them at lower detail so that we can create the best impression depending on their viewpoint. So the Stonehenge circle itself is in very high detail. The further you go out, the detail reduces to save processing power. But we do have barrows, ditches, we do have most of the 20th century artifacts in there, and also representations of the main forests in the distance.
What happens to Stonehenge in the immediate future is controversial. Surrounded by a network of major roads and with its inadequate visitors centre, something has to change. The VR model can help show what the effects of any proposals might be.
There have been two issues that have been running on, which are inextricably linked. One being the roads issue relating to the A303 and upgrading of that, and the other being our wish to upgrade the visitor facilities, and we've been looking in the landscape at putting a better visitor centre into it for several years now. Relatively easily you could model in that environment the proposals and essentially Bob Stone and VR have already done that by having the ability to switch the roads off. You can take the roads out of the landscape, you take the current visitor centre out of the landscape, so that gives you a visualisation of what our vision is in the Millennium Bid that's currently being judged upon.
As a planning tool, it's second to none, and it's certainly one that I think English Heritage would well be advised to exploit as they look at the different scenarios for the year 2000. So we had to start thinking...
Virtual Stonehenge is just the biggest and best known of an explosion of projects bringing VR to the ever-growing heritage industry. Virtual art galleries, virtual museums and reconstructed buildings, like this virtual Colosseum, seem to be springing up as fast as curators can write grant applications. But as the entrepreneurs of this new industry gather to show off their wares, one has to ask what any kind of virtual reality experience can really add to existing, increasingly cash-starved museums.
Can you actually collide with these images?
If you collide with the gondola, you can't fly through it.
And you can get all the information you need from our website.
The dragon.
Scanning artefacts in 3 dimensions and making them available for study inside or beyond the museum is clearly one useful application, and it extends beyond the occasional statue. Professor Fabrizio Funto has digitised the Raphael frescoes of the papal apartments in the Vatican. When the project is completed, virtual scholars will be able to tour the rooms and examine the paintings to the smallest detail. As the viewer approaches the surface, the images are loaded at ever higher resolutions. As well as modelling places and things, virtual reality can recreate events. With the same attention to historical accuracy as the archaeologists, military historians are turning their attention to the virtual battlefield.
We wanted a simulation that had a large number of individual moving objects in the sim. And in Gettysburg, in our version of it, there's over 2,000 individual moving objects. We started out with a large stack of source material. We got accurate terrain and mapping information from the Army Corps of Engineers. There were a set of surveys done in 1868 of the battlefield, and we used those as the direct input into the model. For the movements and casualties, we took the official figures from the U.S. Army War College Guide to the Battle that has all of this simulation type information in it on the number of bullets fired, number of artillery rounds fired, and number of casualties, and those are all accurate from the historical record. I think that this model adds the dimension of fear to understand what it was like to be standing out in a set of shirt sleeves, to hear the rifle fire going on, and to see the large number of casualties that occurred during the battle. It gives you a much greater understanding of the courage it took to stand up in those lines and walk across the field on that day.
The concern for accuracy and empathy is a problem faced by all those involved in virtual heritage. The intention is to engage the audience in a way that books, maps, pots and paintings never can. But with so many games using the same techniques and even the same images, isn't it impossible to draw the line between history and entertainment?
If you try and contrast virtual reality entertainment and virtual reality heritage, there are significant overlaps. For one thing, we use very, very similar techniques in getting the model developed for both cases. It doesn't really matter that, let's say, in the virtual reality Stonehenge, you're not suddenly confronted with a pterodactyl that you have to shoot down, which you might be if you go to the Trocadero. The key thing is the virtual reality, the technology itself, is actually has a motivational element. So that when you put the headset on, when you find that you're free to explore, you're free to interact with whatever you like, then these barriers of communication between unqualified people and the computer break down. And the recall, when you come out of it, you remember much, much more than you would do by picking up a book.
Archaeologists have been using computer reconstructions since this groundbreaking work done on Roman Bath in the early 80s. The phenomenon of virtual heritage is new. As virtual experiences become ever more common and more persuasive, they risk blurring the lines between fact and interpretation. Perhaps ultimately they will deter us from visiting the real thing at all.
The virtual reality Stonehenge is not about deterring people from visiting the site legally. I think if virtual reality does that, we will have failed. And that goes for any artefact or any monument, not just Stonehenge. What it will do is this fourth dimension. We can accelerate the history from many centuries BC right up to the present day and maybe into the future.
You're actually producing an interpretation, so you've got to separate what is your interpretation from what is actual fact, measurable, repeatable fact. So the stones at Stonehenge are currently measurable and therefore repeatable, but the interpretation that's placed upon them is a different thing. And one must be careful, I firmly believe, in not presenting interpretation as fact.
To most of us, computers exemplify the modern world. But now they've been with us for half a century, and we have to consider how they fit into our technological heritage. Alongside the steam engine, the jet engine and the television, Britain can celebrate a number of firsts in computing. But is the history of the computer yet another story of Britain's early innovation being followed by inevitable decline?
Too often when we think of technology, we think just about the future. We think very futuristically about technology. People are now recognizing that we've lived with technology for a very long time. We have yesterday's technological world to think about and preserve. But there is a danger, of course, that we can celebrate that past a bit too much. We can perhaps believe that Britain was the only technological country in the world. We can perhaps think that it was better to live then than it is now.
Manchester University, where anyone who urgently wishes to know whether 2 to the power of 127 minus 1 is a prime number or not, can be given the answer by an electronic brain in 25 minutes instead of by a human brain in 6 months. Setting the machine for this kind of problem takes a week. The computer itself contains 1,500 valves.
The first computer in the world capable of storing a computer program was invented here at Manchester University. The Mark I, as it came to be known, ran that first programme on the 21st of June 1948. And to celebrate its 50th anniversary, as you can see behind me, it is being rebuilt. The team who created the Mark I beat competitors in Harvard and Cambridge to build the first computer that could be programmed. This is the programme, written by Tom Kilburn, the world's first computer programmer.
There were about 4 groups in this country and about the same number in the States, which I knew were working on computers. The problem was the memory or store, because all previous electronic machines had lacked a memory. So everybody was looking for a memory.
The breakthrough achieved by Tom Kilburn and Professor Freddie Williams was to create the first working computer memory, using a cathode ray tube to store their program as a pattern of electrical charge on the screen.
This enabled the machine to do any program which could be written to solve a problem on one machine. And for this reason, it was referred to as a universal machine.
Then the brain is switched on, and impulses passing to the computer make the actual calculation.
So when I actually saw the desired result appear, it was a very exciting time. And we all watched it work again, and there was a bit of cheering, and it was all very exciting.
The group reconstructing the Mark I are members of the Computer Conservation Society, led by Chris Burton. They want to finish the reconstruction so that they can switch it on the exact 50th anniversary of the running of the first programme. But more importantly, they need to complete it while they can still consult the original pioneers.
All but Professor Williams are still alive and active, and we can talk to them, and that's very important to us, to be able to capture their knowledge and reminiscences and recollections of what it was like when they did it. If we left it any later, we'd have lost all that, and in a way the kind of soul of what we're doing would have escaped us.
The Mark I was extensively altered after 1948 and then dismantled. The only hard evidence for how it worked is a handful of photographs, diagrams and notebooks. Reconstructing it has been an exercise in modern archaeology. Chris Burton builds up a picture of the original machine by examining these glimpses and fragments in minute detail. Scanning them into his PC, he uses computer-aided design software to calculate precise dimensions of the original and translate them into new engineering drawings. Any new parts needed are manufactured by computer company ICL, which is sponsoring the project. But Chris has scoured the country for ancient originals.
Of course, it wouldn't be authentic unless we used authentic components so far as possible. Many components we've obtained with the date, October 1943, the date it was packed, and inside is the valve in pristine, brand new condition. And incidentally, we find that these valves still work. This is well over 50 years old. It's very nice to wonder whether this valve came out of the same batch of the valves that Tom Kilburn used in the original machine.
It's somewhat dreamlike to actually see this machine that's actually behind me almost identically as it was then. I could say identically, but I'm sure there are some differences. But I find it very difficult to decide what they are. It's a wonderful achievement that the boys have done.
When you look back at the resources they had, negligible, and the knowledge about computing, negligible, and yet they produced this wonderful construction and everything that sprung from it. So I acknowledge those pioneers, and to an extent they are not acknowledged in public terms. People don't really think about it. They think the computer came from America when the PC was born.
But then some would say that we're not very good at exploiting our innovations. What do you think about that?
I agree with you. As an engineer who's worked in the computer industry all his life, I suppose in a slight way I should say mea culpa, I don't know. I must say that in those early years, in the 50s and 60s when I was working on this, we did it because it was fun. And the sales and marketing and management let us do it because it was fun. And I don't think that would have been an attitude in the United States. They would have done it because it was profitable.
Nearly every country wants to believe that it's especially brainy but not so good at actually making things. And that belief is, I think, especially strong in Britain, where we can point to a whole series of firsts which are supposedly not pushed through into development and into production. But in fact, in many of the technologies that are given as examples, Britain has actually developed them, and Britain has actually produced them on a large scale. Take the computer. Britain was one of the first countries to develop a computer, not the only one, and a lot of development money was put into computing. Into the 1960s, Britain had the largest computer industry in Europe.
This is the site of another and more surprising breakthrough. Where these modern office blocks are behind me used to stand the headquarters of Lyons, the wartime food giant, whose tea shops were as familiar on our high streets as McDonald's is today. In 1951, here on this site, the tea shop company built the world's first business computer. It was called the Leo, the Lyons Electronic Office, and was based on a computer being developed at Cambridge University. Lyons was a family-owned business, blessed with a very progressive management, who were excited by the potential for automating the company's administration. The first business application in the world performed by Leo was to calculate the value of Lyons' bakery output. The Leo isn't being reconstructed, but is the subject of a recent book, celebrating its contribution to computer history, edited by David Kaminer. He was the system analyst on Leo. His colleague, John Pinkerton, was the computer's designer.
The first really large job was the payroll, which we put on the machine because it did have quite a lot of complication to it. It did employ quite a large number of people. We knew it intimately, and we knew it would be a real test for the computer. We were working on a store size of what would it amount to 5,000 bytes now, whereas the smallest processor on anybody's desk runs into megabytes, millions of bytes. The capacity inside the machine was so much larger, and the speed was so much greater now than the machines we had then. The remarkable thing, of course, was we were able to do a payroll in 1.5 seconds per man, which is just about the speed that the fastest computer in the world can do it now. Yes. But it was done by knowing how the machine worked and utilizing the capabilities of the machine to the utmost.
Lyons successfully developed several generations of the Leo for its own use and for sale to other companies right through the 50s, but sold out to English Electric in the early 60s, a time when technology was at the forefront of politics.
The Britain that is going to be forged in the white heat of this revolution will be no place for restrictive practices or for outdated methods on either side of industry.
One policy pursued by Labour's Ministry of Technology was to combat competition from America by merging the UK's computer companies into one national manufacturer, ICL.
The place, the Waldorf Hotel, London. The date, March the 21st, 1968. The occasion, the announcement to the world's press of the final merger in Britain's computer industry.
ICL inherited technology from both the Leo and the Mark I, and with a turnover of £100 million, was the largest computer company outside the USA.
We can't expect to be able to outproduce a large American company, but there's no reason why we can't outthink them.
The culture in America was make it and make it big and get a great many on the market, and not to worry too much about how people are using them. On the support side, it always appeared to me that the American government was putting an enormous amount into military uses of computers and also into the space system, where the technologies that were developed were not specifically computer technologies, but were the technologies which could be used in the construction of computers.
But this obsession with competing with America colours our whole understanding of British computing.
People compare Britain with the United States, which was, right through the century, a much richer, much more powerful economy. But if one compares with Germany or France or Italy, then Britain really does rather well until the late 1960s at the very least. Certainly the argument is made, and it was made in the 60s, that the United States has succeeded in all the great technologies of the years since 1945 because of the support of the Pentagon. Jet engines, even the 707, computers, miniaturization, all these things were seen as deriving from the huge funding that the Pentagon was putting into modern technology. The idea is that that didn't happen in Britain, but of course much the same thing happened on a much smaller scale.
David, there was obviously policy and support in the 60s to promote computers. Would you say there was enough in this country?
Well, I would say there was a negligible amount. We did have some government orders, but each of them we had to work for terribly, terribly hard, as though we were a completely a foreign organisation. There was certainly, we weren't given any advantages, no assistance.
After its formation, ICL was supported by huge computer orders from government departments. But in 1990, in line with Conservative policy, our national champion was sold to Japanese giant Fujitsu, a move some saw as aiding and abetting the decline of the British computer industry.
It's important to remember that British companies weren't the only ones operating in Britain. IBM has been here since at least 1945 and has had very large manufacturing plants and indeed research in this country. Computers are obviously a very international industry, and it's not at all clear that national champions are the right way to go about developing this particular technology. One of the great paradoxes of declinism in relation to British science and technology is that the proponents of investment in science and technology constantly have to do down what's currently happening in Britain. If one believed what the declinists actually say, one would be forced to conclude that less and less money has been spent on R&D in this country, less and less money has been spent on scientific and technical education, that British industries are incapable of innovating, that British engineers have no place in the running of British business. All this is untrue. We know that there is great innovative capacity in Britain, that lots of new things are being developed, and it's important to remember that.
The best place to look for innovation in Britain today is Cambridge, where the founder of Acorn Computers is investing in 20 new technology companies in a bid to create Silicon Fen. In the early 80s, Acorn had huge success as makers of the best-selling BBC Micro, one of the first true multi-purpose home computers.
It's got the three elements that you expect to find: the computer itself, colour monitor, and a cassette recorder for playing the programs back into the computer.
However, Acorn ran into trouble in the 90s and is now controlled by the Italian computer company Olivetti. Acorn's founder was Hermann Hauser.
One of the problems that Acorn had in the early days is that it was only successful in the UK. And although it was clearly superior to all other computer offerings at the time, it couldn't play that superiority in all the countries that mattered. The industry has now become very amorphous and is spread all around the globe, with Silicon Valley leading new market segments. And you've got to ask yourself, where is a slot for us where we can add value and play in this global game? And that's why it's so important to have close visibility of what people are doing in Silicon Valley so that we can fit in. Because whether we like it or not, the agenda is being defined over there. We've got to fit in with it. What has been so successful in the Valley was actually create new companies and grow new companies. And it is really that very rapid growth rate that generates wealth. And I think we need both more US venture capital to help us with that in the UK, and we need more venture capital true venture capital companies in the UK as well.
The BBC Micro's lasting impact on the UK computer industry was to help encourage a generation of programmers who helped later British companies take advantage of the shift in computing from hardware to software. Companies who missed that software wave may have another chance with the internet. Is the internet going to be the new forum for British companies to make their mark?
Oh, absolutely, because everything is up for grabs again. It's as if all the balls had been thrown back up in the air, and it's now for the innovative, quick companies to catch these balls and run with them. And I think there's as much chance for a British company to do that as an American company, as long as people have learned how to play on an international scale, on a global market, and take advantage of the technical ideas that they have.
The role of computing in modern Britain is unresolved, but one attempt to examine both past and future is a proposal to build a National Computer Museum. It will be based at Bletchley Park, in the ruins of Britain's wartime code-breaking triumph, and bring together computer collections from all over the country. This is Colossus, the world's first electronic computer. Developed here during the war to do one job: decipher Germany's encrypted communications. For 30 years it remained one of Britain's greatest secrets. Now it's known as one of our greatest triumphs of invention. Colossus was reconstructed last year and will form the centrepiece of the museum.
We need to educate people as to what's been done in the past so they don't reinvent the wheel again, and to use the experience. So what I want to be able to show here in the museum is not only the hardware working, but the software working. It's the way machines are used which is important, not the machines per se. For instance, I've written a simulation of the Colossus computer which runs on a modern Pentium, 100 megacycle Pentium PC, and that simulation runs half the speed of Colossus. And people say, well, how on earth can that be? And it's because Colossus was a dedicated, hardwired machine, very fast and dedicated to a particular task. A modern PC, of course, is a general purpose machine and not a parallel architecture, and is therefore very slow on these sorts of problems. And that's a salutary lesson to young technologists today.
Colossus was destroyed after the war on Churchill's orders, remaining a secret even from other computer pioneers. But Tony Sale doesn't want the proposed museum to concentrate just on the early days. He believes we can learn lessons from the whole history of computing.
Our aim was to acquire the whole of the site and use the wartime buildings and the ambience, which you can feel here, to create a real centre for Britain and for Europe of the history of computing and technology.
The value of Britain's breakthroughs in early computing is beyond doubt. The story since then is not one of decline, but of evolution. A National Computing Museum could put this in perspective. Unfortunately, so far the Lottery Fund, the Millennium Commission and BT, which owns half the site at Bletchley Park, have refused to support the project. Trains, planes and television all have their own museums. Perhaps the reluctance to grant the same status to computing sadly reflects the real value we place on this key technology.
Fashion is littered with flashbacks to earlier times. Now the short history of computer gaming is reviving its own equivalent of flares, the reappearance of classic games from the 70s on today's PCs. We asked online journalist Dan O'Brien to review this retro gaming phenomenon, but surely he's too young to remember.
Gorf, Sinistar, Battlezone, Qbert, Donkey Kong, Galaxians, Pac-Man, Space Invaders. In 1981, the papers reported a 13-year-old schoolboy sold his body in a car park for 10 games of Space Invaders. I was 12 and playing in a shed round the back of the fish and chip shop on Duke Street, Chelmsford. Space Invaders, one of the first shoot-'em-ups, and certainly one of the first video games to get a cult following. When it was introduced to Japan, the entire country ran out of 100 yen coins. So addictive that it was. Arcade Spaceman. Funorama, fun and games, pirates and slots of fun. These early arcades harboured the first mass computer culture, which spilt out into every single niche. There were Atari Force comics, there were Pac-Man songs, there was Tron, of course. This was most people's first experience of a keyboard, a VDU, a CPU. William Gibson grabbed the images of the arcades when he wrote Neuromancer. It was all he'd seen of the computer age. It was enough. County libraries filled up with how-to-win guides to the games. This one's written by Martin Amis. Yes, the Martin Amis. He writes, "Remember that the Pac-Man Power Pack is a legitimate defensive tool." And who could disagree? There isn't anyone else in these games. They're not networked, and two-player just meant waiting for your turn. Their clunky, hypnotic graphics are custom-made for an only child with a lot of 10p's. Everyone I knew wanted to be an only child then. I'd have sold my brother for a machine in my room. You can sacrifice the humanoids, but don't lose the last one. What these old games encourage more than anything is hyper-focusing. The whole of your concentration is devoted to tweaking the smallest set of variables. An ability to hyper-focus is prized amongst programmers, Zen Buddhists and guards of nuclear silos. One of the symptoms of attention deficit disorder is an exaggerated ability to hyper-focus, combined with a reciprocal inability to concentrate at all the remainder of the time. Training young people to hyper-focus using state-of-the-art equipment installed in every town and village led to introverted lives, consumer apathy, a multi-billion-dollar software industry, and MTV. Hyperspace only in emergencies. Eugene Jarvis was the god who invented this, Defender. Like most of his contemporaries, Eugene and his team of 4 invented the screen, the chips, the code, the plot, even the keyboard. The whole Defender machine was written from scratch. Jarvis himself coded most of the game in 2 weeks after seeing how it worked in a dream. It still stands as one of the best games ever written. In the 80s, they were filling this empty world of computer interactivity from scratch. People like Eugene set the standard and defined the form. At age 25, Eugene implemented in Defender the smart bomb. This was a decade before the Gulf War. Even the Pentagon had to play catch-up to Eugene Jarvis. Level 2, get in front of the bombers, swivel and fire. Eugene once said, the only legitimate purpose of a computer is to play games. Here were games for people who weren't very good at games. If you had reasonably fast reflexes, were intelligent and had a lot of time on your hands, you too could be cool. It was like reading, the same addictiveness, the same closed-off nature. Only in this particular case, your peers still respected you in the morning. On one level, you knew you were wasting your life away, but on another, well, what clearer achievement is there than to be smoking a cigarette as you casually entered your top 10 high score? You're a Robotron hero. Enter your initials. And now they're back. 15 years since we all grew up. These games are making a reappearance on our home PCs, perfectly replicated in every detail. Not a byte of code has changed. Instead, new Jarvises, new obsessives, hyper-focusing sons of Robotron have painstakingly simulated every nook and cranny of those old consoles. The graphics are clunky, the sound is mono, bleepy, incoherent. But I know this game. I've grown up and I've got better. I live on my own now and I have enough 10p pieces to last me, oh well, a week or 2. This time I can win. Game over. Insert coin.
Thousands of years ago, in Alexandria, they dreamt of a library that would capture all the knowledge in the world, that could put the whole cosmos on its shelves. And today's libraries, using different technology, try and do more or less the same thing. But in the future, it could be very different. In David Cronenberg's Videodrome, which I hope you've seen, there's a library which contains a human being, Professor Brian Oblivion, media sage and pop futurologist, consigned to eternity as just a set of monologues on videotapes. It sounds ridiculous, but to Peter Cochrane, who is the head of BT's research labs and one of the few futurologists in Britain of the sort that Cronenberg was talking about, it makes a kind of sense. Professor Cochrane is trying to find technologies that will help us manage the vast amounts of information that BT and other companies are trying to pump into our lives. But beyond that, he dreams of a great new store of knowledge, a store so full that not only the knowledge, but the people who know it are there. He dreams of a future in which no one has to die, at least no one dies 100%.
If I look around these shelves and I look at the authors of these books, the books are a little memory of them. When they die, this perhaps will be all that's left of them. I can say with certainty that I will leave a bigger memory of me than the vast majority of all these authors, and I have produced a very few books. What I have produced is a vast memory bank that is out there on the net that will actually survive longer than the information on these shelves.
Isn't that more a memorial than a memory?
I think that is true until the memory becomes interactive, and it becomes interactive through multimedia, and as that becomes more intelligent, then the memory that is left for me or you or anyone else becomes that more alive.
Do you really think that the digital media can provide the same sort of solidity, the same sort of like lasting effect as these books, or is it a human memory until death?
Nothing is permanent on this planet. The one thing that you can be sure of with the net is that anything that has appeared on the net, there will be a copy somewhere, even though it has disappeared for a while.
What about a technology that might actually record your memories directly?
That would make me very happy. I'm essentially an analog machine. I would, I think, benefit greatly from a digital memory. The instant recall, the accurate recall of information would make me very much more powerful as an individual.
How much do you use the past, the archives of a library like this, when you, in your professional life as a futurologist?
We model the society, the human beings, the technology. Now, you can take linear extrapolations, just a straightforward plotting of points of technology and social change from the past into the future. And when you think of the past, it's the fairly recent past. Now, the linear change, if you will, the extrapolation, is easy to predict. What is very difficult to predict are those things that suddenly occur and they're a complete surprise, like a computer in every home, a computer on every desk, computers that will wear us, cars that have got more technology than the lunar lander. As I look, the biggest fear I have is that technophobia will actually lead to a situation that is now growing very fast. We actually have 16th century minds in management, in government, trying to run a society that's heading towards the 21st century with 21st century technology. Why have we got people worried about a common currency? Why are they even debating it? It's already here. It's called plastic. It's all just numbers in a database somewhere. So what you call it, Deutschmarks, pounds, euros, is immaterial. Now people are fighting that change on the basis of whose head is going to be on the coin. Who cares? There is going to be a swing into electronic commerce that is likely to devastate other sectors. We have to, one, warn people about that coming, two, prepare them for it, and three, make sure that it's done in a non-disruptive way.
And is it good or bad that they should be swept away by change?
If I look back at history, I think all the changes that I have seen have been positive. The world, to my mind, only gets better. The only people who disagree with me are the ones who are wearing rose-tinted spectacles.